Please welcome moderator Jeffrey Lubell, Executive Director at the Center for Housing Policy.
Good morning. Thank you. As we make our way back from the break to the panel, glad to see so many people here. So we will be talking about housing as a platform for economic opportunity, and we are joined this morning by five panelists. Ron Ashford is the Director of Public Housing Supportive Services at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and many of you know Ron through his work on Hope 6 supportive services and other things. Devin Carlson is a graduate affiliate with the Institute for Research on Poverty at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and we'll be talking about a study that he has done with his team there, looking at families with housing assistance and their performance in a variety of economic opportunity metrics. Martina Gillis is a graduate of a HUD program called the Family Self-Sufficiency Program, being administered at Montgomery County, Maryland. And this is the program that's featured in the case study that you all have, so we're delighted that in addition to practitioners and policymakers, we can bring you one of the participants and beneficiaries of these programs. And she's also actually now a mentor, too, to some of the new FSS participants. So it's wonderful to see that happening. Jim Riccio is the Director of Low-Wage Workers and Community Policy at MDRC, a research firm in New York that has national-level experience with efforts to help families in subsidized housing make progress towards economic security, as well as other efforts with welfare reform and other similar initiatives around the country. And finally, Nancy Scull, who is the program coordinator of the Family Self-Sufficiency Program at Montgomery County. That's the focus of the case study. Nancy and I have been talking about FSS for at least 10 years now, and wonderful to have you here. So thanks for the panel. My job now is to walk you through very briefly an overview of the research in this area. And it's a difficult thing to do in 10 minutes. I can sympathize, Heather, with you trying to work through all of this. But if you could turn to the PowerPoint, that would be great. We are. Let me just say before I start that there was a question in the prior panel about how do I access information about research in these areas, and I do want to call your attention to two of the materials that were handed out at the column over there, and they're still plenty available, and we'd love to walk home with none of them, so please take them. But one of them is on the impacts of affordable housing on education, which is a research summary, and it really tries to digest a lot of the research in this area in a format that's usable to practitioners that was done by Maya Brennan. And there's also one on the impacts of affordable housing on health that Rebecca Cohen, who's here with us, put together. So those will be resources, I think, to access a lot of the literature as well as the great resources that Heather mentioned. So this session is about housing as a platform for economic opportunity. We're focused here on the ways in which stable, affordable housing can help individuals improve outcomes in terms of employment and earnings. Skills is one of those intermediate outcomes that's important, but also assets, which is not as often recognized, but is something that an emerging body of research is really confirming as really essential for families to get ahead and make progress over the long term in both becoming and staying economically secure. A number of the pathways here I'm going to talk about in more depth. The affordability and stability are the clearest ones. Health, of course, if your kids are home because they're very sick, then you're not going to be able to go to work, right? And that's going to affect your ability to make progress towards economic security. And access is about a little bit like the Denver program. If you have families in subsidized housing in a particular place, you now have access to a lot of low-income families to which you could deliver services. So I should mention that there is an ideal question that I would like to ask, which is what is the role of stable, affordable housing in helping families become economically secure. And then there's a question that most of the research has addressed, which is what are the impacts of subsidized rental housing on families' ability to make progress towards economic security? And they're not the same thing. They're not the same thing. So my presentation is going to focus primarily on the impacts of subsidized rental housing, but I've noted on this slide some of the key ways in which subsidized rental housing differs from other forms of affordable housing, right? It has a specific rent structure. You pay 30% of your income for rent. If you graduate and you make too much money, you can lose your assistance, which can be scary for folks. Project-based developments are located in particular places, some of which are in very high-poverty neighborhoods, others are not. But vouchers actually give you an increased ability to move to places. So let's just separate conceptually the issue of subsidized housing from the issue of affordable housing generally. So looking first at vouchers, there are reasons to think that housing vouchers may both promote and retard efforts of families to increase their earnings. So let's focus on the positive first. A lot of us, I think, who are practitioners really think about the importance that stability plays in helping recipients focus on getting and keeping a job. Imagine that you're homeless or you're worried about where you're going to sleep tomorrow. How can you give your full efforts to really focusing on getting and keeping a job? There's also, if you are better able to afford your housing costs, you have more discretionary income that can help you afford certain important work expenses, childcare, transportation, work-related clothing. And vouchers do give you the opportunity to move closer to job opportunities or the opportunity to move to transportation areas that are closer to job opportunities. On the negative side, though, you have to pay 30% of your adjusted income for rent, and a lot of families perceive this as a tax on earnings that is a disincentive for them to increase their earnings. There's also a concern among economists that the receipt of the housing subsidy may blunt the incentives of families to go to work, right? On the margins, not everybody, but if you're getting a subsidy, you're going to be a little bit less inclined to go to work. And then we've also seen in some of the research, there's a short-term dislocation of the initial move with the housing voucher. So project-based assistance, a very similar set of considerations. I highlight just two differences. On the pro side, we have the ability to deliver services on site because you have a lot of assisted families in one place. On the negative side, we do know that subsidized developments are often, but not always, located in high poverty areas. So what's the result? We have positive, we have negative. Do they just cancel each other out, or does one dominate? The classic, I think probably the largest randomized and sort of most formal randomized study here is the welfare to work voucher demonstration. Families were given vouchers. These were families who were either on TANF or likely to be on TANF. I think most of them were on TANF. And the question was, we tracked them over time, and what happened to their earnings, what happened to their employment, what happened to other things. So there were major reductions in homelessness, improvements in housing quality, marginal improvements in neighborhood quality. But in terms of work, what we saw actually was a small but significant negative impact on employment and earnings in the first year in which they received the voucher. But that faded over time. So there was a negative impact, it faded over time. So in the aggregate, actually, over time, there was no net impact of the voucher. And we could all go home now, right, because we've solved this problem and there's no impact. But actually, I think it's more complicated than that. I should note there's some other studies. Sandy Newman's done one, that Devin and his team have done one that found very similar results, negative impact that fades away. Jacob and Ludwig did a study in Chicago that found a persistent negative impact. That's a bit of an outlier here, but it is important to acknowledge that this may play out differently in different places. But I think the important thing here is, yes, in the aggregate, we may see no net impact over time. But the question is, if we're right that there are both positive and negative effects on employment, the question is there a way to neutralize the negatives? Right? Can we address the reasons why we think that subsidized housing may actually reduce work effort and allow the positives to shine forward? And there's some good suggestive evidence from one of the most significant welfare reform interventions called Minnesota Family Investments Program, MFIP, that almost all of the earnings and employment gains were among families in subsidized housing. There was a sense that they were very responsive to efforts to provide them with financial incentives to work, to reinforce the value of work. So a lot of the research is really focused on trying to neutralize the negatives and allow the positives to shine forward. Perhaps the most well-known and formal of these was the Jobs Plus demonstration, which was led by MDRC, and Jim Riccio is here, will tell us a little bit more about it. These are the 3 sites that implemented Jobs Plus with the most fidelity, I guess, to the model, right? These are the full implementation sites. And you see here, basically, looking at their earnings of the cohort that entered in 1998 as compared to the treatment group. And you see the red line is a control group, the blue is a treatment group. And basically, after the intervention was rolled out, indeed, there were statistically significant impacts on earnings. And this is a program that basically combined financial incentives for families to increase their earnings with services to help families overcome barriers to work, and then a sense of site-based reinforcement, trying to really saturate the development with services in ways that would reinforce each other, and we can hear more about that a little bit later. One other program that I want to mention before getting to our panel is something called the Family Self-Sufficiency Program. This is a program that's been long in the gestation and has been around for quite a while. It was based on 3 research demonstrations that took place in the 1980s. And basically what it does is it combines stable, affordable housing through the voucher or public housing with case management to help families overcome barriers to work, and a earnings incentive in the form of an escrow account that grows as your earnings grow. So basically, if you go out and increase your earnings by $500 a month, and that leads to $150 more in rent, that extra $150 goes into an escrow account, and if you graduate successfully from the program, you get access to that money. So it's both an asset vehicle, an earnings vehicle, and actually there's been a lot of focus successfully on homeownership. There are about 55,000 participants currently between the voucher and public housing programs in more than 1,000 programs across the country. It's been evaluated twice by HUD, neither of which had a control group. So very important to recognize this was the first evaluation, and I know you can't see all the numbers, but basically the bottom line are single-parent voucher holders' incomes who were not in FSS. The top line are those who were in FSS. This was between 1996 and 2000, a time of earnings growth, right? A strong economy. Certainly some self-selection is involved. This is a voluntary program, so we expect that the folks in the top line were more motivated, but very large incomes increase, and that led HUD to do a subsequent study where they wanted to follow families over a period of time. This study came out, I think, in January, and it tracked 170 families for 4 years. I don't know to what, I guess you can see that pretty well. But again, no control group, but look at the results. About a quarter, this was after 4 years, between 2006 and 2009, not exactly a period known for the strongest economy. And the program itself is a 5-year intervention. So some of the, hopefully they'll follow up again when these folks actually graduate. But a quarter of the families had already graduated. They had increased their incomes from $19,900 to $33,000 on average during this period of economic decline, and they had accumulated over $5,000 per family in assets in their escrow account. And we know, again, from a lot of other research that assets can really make a difference in families' resiliency, right? If you lose your job or you have a health expense, I mean, sort of preventing you from going into that decline. Another quarter of the families were in FSS and mostly employed. They'd experienced about 16% increase in their incomes, and the jury was still out on 23 of the families, and about a third of the families had actually left FSS. Many of them had actually left housing assistance, so hopefully we'll follow up on them as well. I am pleased to note that HUD will be doing a randomized evaluation of FSS shortly. I think the RFP had already hit the street. Perhaps the results are already in, and looking forward to working with them to really studying the impact. So that's really the conclusion of the overview. So positive and negative effects, they may very well neutralize themselves, but there is a potential, I believe, I hope, at least there's some suggestion that there's a potential that we can actually neutralize some of the negatives and allow the positive to shine forth. And that's what a lot of folks are involved in today. So I'm now I'm gonna get mic'd up quickly, and we'll start the panel. So, just one advance warning, which is that I'm really going to try to go to the audience early and often, if possible, and would urge you to be thinking not both about questions, but also about comments and statements. I know that there are many in this audience that have expertise in this area and would love to get your input and your thoughts and your interaction with the panel. So keep that in mind. We're going to talk for a little bit and then open it up. And I'll give you some advance warnings so you can queue up your questions. But I'd like to start with Martina Gillis. So our case study is about the Montgomery County FSS program. You are a graduate of that program. I would love to hear about your experience with FSS. What impact did it have on your life? And what is it like to go from being a participant to being a mentor for other FSS participants?
Okay, great. Thank you. I just want to say thank you so much for inviting me here today. I think this is a great conference, bringing so many different sectors together that really intersect and all play a vital role in ensuring that folks have stable, quality, affordable housing. So thank you. I always like to I think I'm just nosy, so I always want to know, like, what brings people to a specific place at a specific time? What's their focus? What drove them here? And so I just want to share a few of my personal life experiences that led me here today to speak on this panel as a graduate from the Family Self-Sufficiency Program in Montgomery County. I was a welfare recipient. I've been homeless. I received subsidized housing. I connected with the Family Self-Sufficiency Program. I received 2 master's degrees. I'm a homeowner. I've always been a role model to my children. There's nothing special about me. I've had access, opportunity, and expectations. Others expected from me, and I expected great things from myself. And so I just like to lay that out there. When I walked into a welfare office many years ago, I won't date myself, I have to say it was the most humiliating experience I ever felt in my life. I walked into a place where I thought I was going to get some support, some assistance, and some guidance and direction. I left out of there feeling ashamed, feeling like a failure, and looking at myself saying, what's wrong? What's wrong with me? But it also sparked in me my life journey of being a great advocate for other low-income families. I've been a successful leader of 2 local coalitions that have addressed housing, homelessness, and welfare reform issues in both San Francisco and here in Washington, D.C. Housing for me was definitely very key when I received my housing subsidy. Again, I was homeless at the time. I had 4 case managers. I had a curfew at the housing shelter. I had nightly housing meetings that I had to meet. And I had to drop out of school because of the mandates and the demand of being homeless. So for me, that was a huge setback. And again, it was something that's, I thought, like, what is wrong here? I am doing what I should be doing. I'm trying to get my education so that I can increase my earnings, so that I can afford my own housing and not be in this situation. But the situation I was in was hindering my process, my progress. So I would say the flexibility of programs are needed to address the needs of individuals. When we're looking at policies, I think we have to definitely think outside the box and not develop cookie-cutter programs that we expect everybody to walk into and then walk out on the other side of success. It just doesn't work that way. The Family Self-Sufficiency Program for me, and I was in the program in San Francisco and in Montgomery County. 2 completely different experiences. The San Francisco program had a coordinator. The Family Self-Sufficiency Program was not her sole responsibility. There are over 100 participants in the program, therefore I got nothing. I got no assistance, no guidance, no mentoring, no sharing and exchange with others like me. Going to the Family Self-Sufficiency Program in Montgomery County, completely different. There were a lot of resources there. There were mentors. We come together as a group, the mentors and mentees, and so there's a constant exchange of information, of encouragement, and developing really of a support system that so many poor folks just don't have, I think was really crucial. And having someone there to talk through your plans with, someone there to keep you accountable, and to provide you with that assistance. It's extremely difficult in navigating the bureaucracy of receiving assistance. So to have a mentor or case manager to call up and say, I need child care, and then they put you in touch with that right person is extremely key. Again, I've had to disenroll, and I was fortunate enough to find someone, but I had to disenroll in school one semester because I didn't have child care. I had a welfare caseworker who wouldn't call me back. I knew I was eligible for this child care subsidy because I had did some outside research. She wouldn't call me back, so I couldn't get my child care subsidy. And I had to call her supervisor, and it was fortunate that in the arena I was working in, I had a personal relationship with the director of the welfare department. So why I had to pick up the phone to call Will Lightbourne, the director of DHS, to say, my caseworker isn't calling me back, I'm gonna have to drop out of school next semester, is just ridiculous. But again, when I talk about having access and opportunity, I had it. And so I think that's what a lot of folks are missing. That's what programs like the Self-Sufficiency Program provide. It provides you with opportunity and the knowledge to work around some of the barriers that are in your way for, as a result of being poor and disconnected and often isolated.
Martina, really quickly, could you just tell us, did you accumulate escrow, and if so, what did you spend the money on?
I did accumulate escrow, and as I said, I'm a homeowner, so I was able to buy a condo in Montgomery County. And
did you use the escrow as a down payment?
I used it as part of, yes.
Part of your down payment? Mm-hmm. Okay, great. And are you still a homeowner?
I am still a homeowner. Yes. And again, I now mentor families in the Family Self-Sufficiency Program. So it's, I've had, a 360-degree, view of the program.
Great. Nancy, you are the administrator of the Montgomery County FSS program, have been for just a few years now, right? What... For you, what is the most important feature of the program? What is it that really works and is most important? Is it the case management? Is it the escrow? Is it some combination? Is it something else that the designers didn't even anticipate when they designed the program?
Okay, there's several things about FSS, Family Self-Sufficiency. First of all, we have 5 to 7 years to work with a family. And know that the average age of people enrolling in the family is about 36 or 37. I think that's true across the country. So we have middle-aged folks, and I think in our case, maybe it was 20% or more who began the program without a high school degree. So we need that time to really help people. We have foreign-born as well and so on. And furthermore, all of us have lifelong behavioral patterns, and to try to help folks to change that, we need the time. So I hope that we can maintain that 5 to 7 year program time. Also, it's a voluntary program, which I believe is very important. It's voluntary, which means that the people who come into the program are motivated, like Martina. They have a sense of hope that there can be change. They very often don't know how to make that change, those changes, but they have to have a degree of hope. And what we give them is the consistent, comprehensive, and integrated case management services. So we are helping someone like Martina to pull the resources together, to tackle the other agencies and their non-response or whatever, or not helping. And of course, some of them are very helpful. And basically, our approach is to build on strengths and barriers. So we work with our folks with respect. And I think Martina gave you an example where she did not feel respected. So I think that's also pretty special about our program. Our case managers are consistent. We integrate services. We show our respect for the individual and the families. And of course, the escrow is very precious. This is an incentive. Imagine yourself as a middle-aged single mom, which is the vast majority of our families, and you are trying to, or being encouraged by the program with lots of support and encouragement, you can do it, to get a job, to go to school. Maybe no one in your family has ever gone to college. And it is scary to realize that that will mean that my rent is going to go up. That was one of the disincentives here. Well, with that escrow as your incentive, it gives our families the courage to take that step. And I think that those are some of the main pieces that make FSS special.
Okay. So not everybody in subsidized housing is enrolled in the Family Self-Sufficiency Program. So it would be interesting, Devin, if you could tell us a little bit about your research and looking at the economic impacts of receiving a voucher in public housing. Were they the same? Were there different impacts for different forms of assistance? Tell us a little bit about your study.
Sure. So the MacArthur Foundation was generous enough to give a grant to a group of us at the Institute for Research on Poverty to study the effects of voucher receipt on a wide range of social, economic, and other outcomes. And we were able to use detailed data from Wisconsin. We used public assistance records, and we were able to link that up with earnings records from the unemployment insurance database, and then we were able to match those to census block groups. So we had information on the neighborhoods, we had information on their work histories, and we had information on all sorts of other aspects of recipients' lives. And so to analyze the effect of subsidized housing receipt on earnings, what we did was we did a few analyses. First, we compared the effects of receiving a voucher to receiving no assistance at all. And when we did that analysis, what we found was that, like Jeff said earlier, an initial drop in earnings of about 10% in the first year, but over time that faded away. And by about 4 years after the voucher was initially received, there's no difference between the voucher recipients and the comparison group we had. Then we compared voucher recipients to public housing recipients. Both of these groups face similar incentive structures where they both have to pay 30% of their income toward rent, they receive a subsidy, and there's an income eligibility threshold. And so they face the same incentive structure, and not surprisingly, we didn't see much of a difference, any difference, in the earnings between these two groups. And then finally, we did a third analysis where we compared voucher recipients to recipients of public housing in Milwaukee. The majority of these recipients reside in Hope 6 projects, and they're required to sign a self-sufficiency lease addendum that says they'll either be employed or looking for employment. And when we looked at the results of this analysis, we found that the residents in public housing who had to sign this lease addendum, they performed significantly better in the labor market than voucher recipients who did not have a similar requirement. So that we took that as some evidence that some of these initial negative incentives that households face when they receive a voucher, they can be mitigated or even eliminated through specific steps that the program can be designed in a manner to eliminate or mitigate those incentives.
And were there in the Hope 6 sites, did you look at whether there were any specific services that were designed to help in addition to the sort of requirement in the lease, were there special services in the Hope 6 development?
The Hope 6 projects do definitely have a wide range of services to help families. They not only require them to sign this lease addendum, but then they provide the resources and the help to help achieve that, help achieve employment and self-sufficiency. And so the combination of focusing on self-sufficiency, just that focus, may make a voucher seem less than just a rental subsidy and more like an opportunity to help improve your overall life.
So Ron Ashford, you for many years have focused on supportive services in Hope 6 and very interested in the approach that HUD has taken to promoting economic opportunity through the Hope 6 program. So what's the role of services? What services do you emphasize most?
Good.
What's the impact of Hope 6 and other services on employment and earnings?
Okay, so I want to talk about Hope 6, but I want to also say that our office also runs the Family Self-Sufficiency Program. So I'm at HUD, I push numbers. I look at numbers, family self-sufficiency participants across the country. How many programs do we have? How many participants in there? It's very seldom that I get to see a program and a graduate. And I think we need to give you a hand. We need to stop and give you a hand. Because this is what the program is about that we lose a lot of times in government. We lose that whole perspective. So Hope 6, I think there are like 3 turning points in the life of Hope 6 that led us to really focus on employment and to be a little more effective. When the program was first established, the Hope 6 program, 92, 93, there was no focus on economic self-sufficiency. There was a community and supportive service section, but the community and supportive service section was actually contracted to Corporation for National and Community Service. And the idea was that it was about community building and volunteerism, and that's what we wanted to focus on. So HUD was not even involved in community and supportive services, CSS, right? And of course, the Hope 6 grants go to severely distressed public housing. The change came about in about 95, 96, when we realized that the culture of Corporation for Community Service and public housing authorities was not meshing, and 2, TANF came about. So TANF came about, and all of a sudden, the focus of Hope 6 and HUD had to be away from community building, volunteerism, to economic self-sufficiency. How do we get people jobs? That was one of the key turning points for us. Another one was when Barbara Mikulski, who was a key funder of Hope 6, and she pushed it, came out with the statement that, what I see happening is that HUD is converting vertical poverty to horizontal poverty. It's taking down the Hope 6 developments, sending people into other neighborhoods without a support system, without any mechanism of getting the residents who have the Section 8 vouchers into jobs. So we began to tighten up our shop and mandating that case management had to happen, not only for the residents who were at the site or who would be returning to the site, but for those residents who had Section 8 vouchers as well. The third thing that really changed our program was the Urban Institute did a study of relocation in 6 cities. And they came back and they said, you know what, the Hope 6 is pretty well-run program. We see this. But here's one thing we saw which we did not intend to see, that the health of your public housing residents in these developments is beyond bad. And looking at black women as the standard, if you will, obesity rates twice as bad, hypertension twice as bad, depression twice as bad. So if you expect to get residents of public housing of your Hope 6 sites into employment and you're not addressing health, you're not going anywhere. So we began to focus a lot more on health. We began to work with HHS, trying to link up their federally qualified health clinics with public housing. We have a program with NIH right now, with Every Heartbeat is Life, where residents train other residents on looking at preventing and managing health outcomes. But it's more than health. It's an integrated model that you cannot just focus on employment. You have to look at health, you have to look at daycare, you have to look at transportation, you have to look at a myriad of issues if you're really talking about employment, because employment doesn't happen unless you address those other issues.
Right. There's a little bit of a common theme there with the first panel, right? It's just shocking to me that people do not segment themselves into the same bureaucracies that the federal government does in terms of housing and health and education. They're actually integrated people. Well, we might need to have some integrated initiatives. Speaking of integrated initiatives, Jim Riccio, can I call you the father of Jobs Plus? Or?
As many parents.
Many parents, okay. Well, Jobs Plus, as I mentioned, is one of the seminal research studies in this area. You've been doing this for a long time. Would love to get, what's your fundamental takeaway from Jobs Plus? What do we really learn from that demonstration? Are there any plans for replicating it? If you replicate it, are you going to do it any differently? Are you going to do it the same way? Help us understand that.
Okay. Jobs Plus was a public-private partnership, and HUD and the Rockefeller Foundation led the effort with the major funders. So they were instrumental in getting this off the ground and in making evidence building central to the initiative. And Jobs Plus stands out, I think, because it's a rare study where we can say that we believe the effects because they were measured so rigorously. We have a comparison group that is a very good indicator of what would have happened in the absence of the intervention, and we could see whether Jobs Plus made a difference. And Jeff showed you the graph, which is captures much of the story, but what it doesn't show that's also quite encouraging about Jobs Plus is we were able to see the same effects in 3 to 4 very different communities serving different population groups with different labor markets and different housing markets. So there was a robustness to the model that suggested it might travel well. So that was very comforting. After talking about the results for many years and thinking that we had something that deserved some attention by policymakers, nothing much happened. But we did finally catch the ear of the Bloomberg administration, which at the time of its the second term, the mayor's second term, we're getting serious about poverty, and we're establishing a poverty commission. And turned out that, of course, that Sean Donovan was part of the administration as head of OMB, head of HPD, sorry. And in New York City, there's so many people who receive housing subsidies that you can't really think about addressing poverty without really addressing people living in public housing or receiving rent vouchers. So part of the administration's interest in doing something with poor people in New York turned to Jobs Plus as an evidence-based strategy for making a difference. And so the Center for Economic Opportunity, which is an office within the mayor's office, decided to replicate the program within a large housing development in Harlem. Subsequently, New York City, in partnership with MDRC and others, have received some funds through the Federal Social Innovation Fund to replicate Jobs Plus in another location, in another development in New York City, and in San Antonio, Texas. And finally, and very recently, just within the last few months, the mayor has launched what he's calling a Young Men's Initiative, which is a substantial, I think, $130 million public-private effort to try to help young men of color, in particular, improve education economic outcomes. And they've adopted Jobs Plus as one of the strategies that they're going to include in a portfolio of programs. Again, feeling comfortable that because it was an evidence base, this was something that was worth doing on a larger scale. So I'd say New York City has been at the forefront of resurrecting the idea, bringing more attention to it, and really scaling it up. And in terms of adapting the model, I think they are trying to stay true to the core principles. Of course, there have to be adaptations. But one significant change, I think a nice enhancement, is that they have made an alliance with the Office of Economic Empowerment in New York City and have added an asset building component to the program, and are trying to provide residents with very specific counseling on managing their money and building assets, and that seems to reinforce, or we hope it'll reinforce, the work focus of the program.
Great. So we're going to talk for another maybe 15 minutes or so, and then open things up. So start queuing up the questions. I'm interested in knowing, is there a population to which these types of interventions are particularly helpful or particularly unhelpful? Is it easiest to help families, or does FSS work best for families who start out with zero earnings, or does it work best for families who start out making, working full-time in a minimum wage job? Or is it some other group? What do you think, Nancy?
Okay, I would like to throw out a few statistics because I think it might be helpful to that issue. We have had about 1,600 families in our FSS program over 18 years in Montgomery County, Maryland, and about 35% began unemployed, some of them on welfare, but unemployed. 16% lacked high school or GED. Then about 14% were on disability, SSI, SSDI, and 25% foreign-born. Now, often foreign-born take longer because they need to learn English language skills and so on. So that's an issue. That's why we're glad for the 5 to 7 years, for one thing. Okay, so it's true that if someone comes in unemployed into FSS and they do well in the program, that they are going to have more escrow accrued by the end. Because if you start at a higher point of your rent payments and so on over the 5 years, because you're employed, you probably will not have as much escrow. And in fact, it's about twice as much. Our average for those who came into the program unemployed, the average escrow is about almost $15,000. Whereas when we looked at all of those who, I'm talking about the graduates, of course, because it's the graduates who get that money. If you don't graduate, meet your goals, and maintain employment, you don't get that escrow. Okay, whereas the people who come into the program already with employment, the average escrow for those is about $7,700. So it's about half. However, we see, this was interesting because I just did this research yesterday. Again, when you look at the people who come in unemployed, they go from 0 to, at the time of graduation, an average of $25,800. Whereas the people... In
earnings? Is that earnings?
Earnings, yes, I'm sorry. Whereas the people who begin with their earned income, they came in at an average earnings of about $20,000, and they graduated $12,000 or so higher at an average of $32,900 for their earnings. So I really do feel that FSS helps both populations very much. I don't know if Martina would agree. You came in unemployed, but you probably work with people who came into FSS already employed.
Yes.
Yeah. And what do you see? Is it important still for them to be in FSS?
It's definitely important. But I had one family where the transportation issue was potentially going to affect her ability to work. And she was able to get some money out of her escrow to buy a car so she could continue working. And so it really, serves as a bridge to keep people stable and secure.
Mm-hmm. So Jim, you have, I think, slightly different impression when we were talking before. Do you want to just share that information or data?
Okay. First, from Jobs Plus, we found that that program had positive effects on people who had a weak work history before they entered, and a lot of time unemployed before they entered the program, as well as for those who were already employed. So that's I'd say a rare example where you have good evidence that it's of a program helping both groups. But to speak to the other issue, I need to introduce a study that we're doing in New York City called Work Rewards, which actually was designed in partnership with Sean Donovan when he was at HPD. And this is a study that was designed to test using a random assignment design of the effects of FSS within New York City and adding to the regular FSS program an extra financial incentive to sustain full-time work. The idea being that the escrow may be a great asset-building tool. As an incentive, it's rather distant. You may not see the money for 3 to 5 years. And so we thought, well, let's test whether you'd get a bigger effect if you had a more immediate financial incentive. So families working full-time, sustained full-time employment could earn an extra $150 per month by sustaining full-time work. We have very preliminary data so far. We'll have a much more comprehensive set of results down the road. And the data only cover 18 months of follow-up so far, and they're actually not even published yet. And I should say the MacArthur Foundation is helping to fund this study. And what we find is that the overall employment and earnings impacts over the first 18 months are very small. I think there's some early effects that go away, but there's really not much impact on the overall sample. However, when you divide the sample into those who are not working at baseline and those who were working at baseline, already you see a fairly distinct pattern, more pronounced for the group that got the extra financial incentive. And all of the effect was concentrated on those who were not working at baseline. And there was no effect on those who are already working at baseline. Those who are already working, 18 months later, of course, they had much better outcomes. 75% or more were still employed. The group that started not employed, their employment rates were pretty low, probably never rose above 35 or 40%. But the program made a bigger difference for that group. There was added value for that group. And in the treatment stream that got the combination of FSS with the extra financial incentive, it was about a 46% increase in earnings over the first 18 months. And it stands to reason, I think, that you would see this kind of difference. I think programs, employment advisors know how to get people jobs. It's very hard to help people advance in work. And MDRC has a number of other randomized trials working with welfare populations of people who have a history of welfare, other low-income groups that have explicitly targeted advancement strategies. And a few have shown some promise, but by and large, it's very difficult. I don't think we have good technology and good evidence yet. So I think in sum, this is growing evidence that it might be easier to help those not working make real progress in the labor market, but we have to think harder about how we help workers advance.
Did you want to address that, Ron?
Yeah. One thing I think we have to point out is FSS is a voluntary program, so that for even those who are not working, they self-select to go into that program. So in other words, they have that initial drive, which is going to drive those numbers up. The key question for us is the rest of public housing, the hard-to-house families who are not volunteering for the FSS program. What are we going to do to advance them? That's a key question for us.
And the answer, so, you're right. So it's a voluntary program. What can be done to take it to scale? I mean, and just to underscore the importance of this, I mean, imagine if we could increase everyone's earnings 10%, it doesn't sound like a huge thing, but actually when you look at the budgetary impact of that, they're paying, that much more in rent, and we're freeing up money that we could use to help other families, and not to mention them being better off themselves. So what do we need to do to take it to scale? And then I'm going to open it up. So this is, I'm going to open it up in about 5-10 minutes for questions.
So the Hope 6 program and the Choice Neighborhood programs are programs that are trying to expand it outwards. Choice Neighborhoods, of course, goes beyond the Hope 6 footprint to a neighborhood, and how do we enroll not only the families in the targeted public housing development, but the rest of the neighborhoods. So that's one thing. We have a ROSS program, Resident Opportunity Supportive Services, that focuses on a service coordinator. So it doesn't have the escrow account, but it does have a service coordinator whose job is to, one, find out the needs of everyone in that development, and then connect them to the needed services, to the job training program, to the education program, after school program. That reaches other folks beyond the FSS population. We still need a push, and I know that there are other housing authorities that are looking. Atlanta has a model, Chicago has a model, and Urban Institute is actually looking at Portland, Chicago. They've extended it to Brownsville in New York and some other city to look at how do you wrap your hands around the hard-to-house population.
Nancy?
Could I just, okay, maybe I better stay on task here. So what could we do? I mean, Martina, I'd be interested to see what you think about this question of, do we mandate enrollment in FSS for everybody who's able-bodied and non-elderly or not? I mean, I think we could try that if we get the funding for the coordinators, the case managers who are needed, and of course the resources in the community. I think it would be less effective than using the model right now where it is a voluntary enrollment. But
yeah, and I guess I would just fear of seeing a cookie cutter program being developed with not enough resources. So just another unmandated program that fails and really, doing more harm than good. So I think if there is consideration and talk about mandating the program, that folks need to be serious and committed to making sure that the funding is there, that will provide those supports and connections so that the program, continues to play that bridge and that support for families. Again, I've been in the program in San Francisco and Montgomery County, and they're two very different stories. Montgomery County was committed to the program. San Francisco was not. Therefore, they did not have a successful program. The coordinator was awesome. She was fabulous. She was full of energy. She had lots of ideas. Family self-sufficiency was a piece of her job, and it was not a main focus. So again, I think, if we are talking about mandating, then we also have to be just as committed to funding the program and making sure that the resources are there to have the program succeed.
The thing I was trying to add is that I think it's important, and I don't know what your research shows on this, but it's important to realize that we're talking about families in Section 8, housing choice voucher, or public housing. They are low income. When they come into FSS, whether they're employed or not, those who are employed are usually in mediocre jobs, right? The lowest level jobs. They still are people generally who do not have a very good work history, who do not have much education and training, and those are the folks, as opposed to the ones who come in unemployed, but the ones who come in employed are more likely to be interested in raising their earnings, getting the education, getting the training. And I think that that's also significant, because what we're trying to do here is break a cycle of poverty for future generations. And our single moms, our parents, want to do better for themselves, for their children, for the future generations.
So I'm gonna get to you in a second. Could you start lining up? If anyone wants to join the conversation, just line up and we'll start. We're gonna turn to Devin and Jim and see if you have any final words on this question before we go to the audience.
So just to go along with what Nancy was saying, our research has kind of provided some indications that there are voucher recipients who truly view vouchers as a platform to economic opportunity. We see them move to better neighborhoods, and these individuals who move to better neighborhoods do better in the labor market. So they use the voucher to improve all aspects of their lives. But there's also some evidence that, in talking to housing authorities, that some recipients see it just as a means to help pay the rent. And I think it's crucial, and it's not clear how to do it, to promote the view of it as a truly a platform for economic opportunity like we're talking about today. It's not exactly clear how, but that's really important to, because it can provide much better outcomes.
Okay. I'll just address the scale-up issue a little bit. And again, I understand New York is a very special place in some good ways and not so good ways. It's certainly different. But in this particular evaluation, there's the FSS and FSS Plus incentives evaluation. We made a concerted effort to target all low-income families who were receiving housing choice vouchers issued by HPD. And so recruiters had to work off a list. What we tried to do is avoid just enrolling the most eager volunteers. It was a voluntary program in the end, but we really pressed families who might not come forward on their own to come forward. So it took a long time, and it was very hard to do. Once families volunteered, enrolled, and went through the random assignment process, among those who ended up in the FSS only group, only about 40% actually showed up to an orientation or got involved in the program in some way. Those who ended up in the group that also offered the financial incentives, about 70% of that group showed up and engaged in the program. And we've heard anecdotally that many of those who were in the first group, FSS only, were hoping to get the incentive, and when to be eligible for it, and when they were not, they then lost interest. So I think the whole issue of how you engage families who might in fact benefit from the program is an important one and requires some creative thinking.
Right.
You're going to scale up.
I should know that most FSS programs, successful ones, have very long waiting lists of people trying to get in and can't serve all the people that they're trying to serve. So it is interesting to ask whether the particular experience in New York was unique to the fact that you were combining an immediate incentive with the escrow, and some families may have felt they got the booby prize by getting FSS, whereas I think a lot of other places, they don't have that option, and they're just happy to enroll. So we have to make sure we frame the results in the context of what we're doing. So here's the ground rules. So we are not going to all respond to every question, right? So we get as many people as possible. But we'll see who is most motivated to respond, or maybe some comments won't require a response at all. So please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Gina Petrocchi. I'm the CEO of Bailey House, which is run AIDS housing in New York City for 27, 28 years. But I'm a New Yorker, so I'm obsessed with Occupy Wall Street, as most of us are these days. And, one of the things that's happening down, or the folks are talking about, young people that are down there, is there are young people coming out of major academic institutions with bachelor's and master's degrees into a job market where they can't get entry-level positions. So that's one piece of it. And so where do the folks that we're talking about, where do they go? And the other issue I have is, in the job training and the job programs that I've seen, when people graduate, they don't make what the National Low-Income Housing Coalition calls the housing wage, the minimum per hour wage you have to make to afford housing in any city around the country. And I know HUD just released its new FMR rates yesterday or today. So anybody can comment on that.
Well, I'll make one comment. With the New York City study, this FSS study, we began tracking people were enrolled in the program before the economic downturn, and we've continued to track them into it. We'll track them longer term, hopefully even after it's over completely. And what we have not seen, which we expected to see, was that there would be a real fall off in employment, even among the control group, that the employment rates would just plummet as we entered those calendar periods where the economy had tanked. And that didn't happen, and people who were working seemed to be sustaining work. So I think it may be that there are segments of the labor market where at least the early stages of the downturn, were not as harsh for at least people in New York. And we've seen this in a few other studies as well. It's not an isolated example.
I can't touch that first question. I don't know how to touch that first question. On the second question, one of the things that HUD is doing, I don't know if you know about Section 3. Section 3 is a requirement that if you receive HUD funds, you're supposed to hire public housing residents or low-income residents, youth bill. Hasn't been happening. There's a hole in it as big as anything that you can drive a truck through. But HUD is in the process of tightening up those regulations so that at least for public housing residents might have a better shot at getting into some of those construction training, those construction jobs that all housing authorities has. NYCHA probably has hundreds of millions of dollars that go to construction that residents are not now accessing. So that is taking place. And I hopefully, the other thing we're doing is we're working with Department of Labor. The two systems don't work that well together, Department of Workforce Investment Board and public housing authorities. We had an intern come this summer working on a publication to demystify public housing authorities to workforce investment boards and vice versa, right? So, and the best practices where Portland and Milwaukee and other cities have actually worked together, that's in the publication as well. So we're trying to push that out.
Okay, thanks.
One more response to that. The word family self-sufficiency came up a lot. That's the name of a program. But I actually don't use that term when I talk about these programs because I actually don't think the goal is for every single family to be, quote, self-sufficient, end quote. I don't think that's realistic. It's not going to happen, right? There's probably some percentage of people who are living in subsidized housing who could increase their earnings, some small percentage, to the point where they can now afford decent quality housing. And there's going to be a large group that's not going to make much, that's really stuck in multiple ways. And then there's some group in the middle that's going to experience significant earnings gains, but will never be able to afford market rate housing. But the question is, are they now better off in terms of having more residual income, in terms of the example they're providing for their children, in terms of reducing the federal expenditure so we can help more families. So I think you're right. Not everyone's going to achieve self-sufficiency. But if you go from 19,000, if some percentage of people can go from 19,000 to 31,000, as in that study, but it's not everybody, and some people you don't help, is that still worth doing? Open question, but important one.
Okay,
Andrea.
Hi, I'm Andrea Levere, the president of CFED, Corporation for Enterprise Development. We do asset building for low-income families, and I first want to say I'm very proud to be a resident of Montgomery County today, and for all your great work. So I want to make 2 points and then ask a question, which is we work very closely with the Office of Financial Empowerment in New York City. And my favorite quote from the Commissioner of the Department of Consumer Affairs, Jonathan Mintz, is that asset building is the super vitamin that makes anti-poverty programs work better. The second line we work with, because we do children's savings accounts, and have seen extraordinary impacts of savings for children, both on their aspirations for college, but also on the parents, is that parents will do for their children what they won't do for themselves. And that also has huge behavioral impacts. The field itself has understood that one solution does not change things. Jeff's point is like that, and we've begun to see a continuum of interventions from very simply getting people banked, which is what New York City has done to great success, to dealing with the credit score, which is the single most important thing in employment after having the skills, to then building savings, and building savings in the short term and then long term for real asset building. And that's how we have to rethink all these interventions. And I would love the Montgomery County folks and HUD to say, how do you think about these interventions working together? And what kind of policy strategies do we need to make them effective?
Okay, so let me start, and I know that you want to jump in. We're working with HHS and the Assets for Independence. So we recently had a couple of meetings to talk about, can we we're going to use our 8 brand new Hope 6 sites, enroll people in FSS, also enroll them in AFI, Assets for Independence, which is an IDA type program, and see whether people can achieve economic self-sufficiency quicker.
What's an IDA program?
An IDA program is an individual development account. You put in savings and it's matched on a one-to-one or 2-to-1 basis, right? Financial literacy is included in the Assets for Independence program. So we're hoping to combine the programs. The escrow can't be used as a match, but so it'll be 2 separate programs, 2 separate savings accounts happening. So we're trying that very small, right? So that's one thing we're doing, and we're looking at doing a webinar actually with our Choice Neighborhoods grants, because we have Choice Neighborhood grants and they're focusing on housing, they're focusing on neighborhoods. We want them to focus also on asset independence and building assets. So the children's savings, we want to talk to them about that. We want to talk to them about AFI. We want to talk to them about a range of programs. Again, small, but we hope to move it, get some positive evidence, and then push it out beyond.
Anybody else want to respond to that?
No? Well, I don't have much else to add, but yes, we are very, very interested in IDA accounts. We have not been able to do that in our 18 years with FSS. We have tried several times. There's one small nonprofit that had the IDAs in our county, IDA funding, and they dried up in about 4 or 5 years. So it's really difficult. And I don't know how that's going to end up. So I'm hoping that we can do something here.
3 of us are going to do it.
Yes, right.
All right. There's a nice follow-up there. Amy.
Hi, my name is Amy Anthony. I'm president of POA. We're a national nonprofit that administers a great deal of Section 8 project-based housing and are a recipient recently of a choice grant. One of the persistent silos, I believe, at the federal level has been the distinction between public housing residents and voucher holders whose programs come through housing authorities and project-based Section 8, which is, of course, the similar population. I just wanted, so FSS has not been a program tool that's been available through the owners like us, nonprofit owners of Section 8 housing. I just want to urge that the department work hard to try to think inclusively in terms of populations that are very, very similar and make sure these program options are available.
I should add that there is talk in Washington about amending that Family Self-Sufficiency Program to open it up to project-based Section 8. Mm-hmm. There have been bills drafted, not filed yet, to do that. And if happy to coordinate about, because it is a disparity. Why should you not have access to the same resources that those programs do?
But again, there has to be funding for the coordinators, case managers, and for the resources. Right.
Yep, need to have funded. Did you want to add to that, Michael?
I do. This is Michael Bodakin from the National Housing Trust, and I was essentially going to say that both Senator Reid and the House Appropriations Committee have actually considered these. They don't have the resources to back them up, and we need to, if we're serious about doing this for project-based Section 8 properties, make sure that the programs have the funding necessary to make them real. But it's a step forward that they're at least thinking about it.
Great. So before we ask Barbara for her comment, if anyone else has a thought, a comment, want to contribute to this discussion, please join the queue while we're addressing Barbara's question. We'd love to engage you in this conversation. Barbara.
Well, I have about 10, so I could
one.
keep going. I'm Barbara Sard. I'm Vice President for Housing Policy at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, and recently had the honor of being Senior Advisor to Sean Donovan for rental assistance at HUD. So I've worked on these issues for longer than I care to remember, and I think that where I now am, I wanted to share and also share some upcoming research that the Center will be publishing soon. I think, similar to what many of you have said, it seems to me that, and the data bear this out, that most of the non-elderly, non-disabled families that get HUD assistance, rental assistance, work. There is not and we've looked at the data even in 2010, where unemployment is really bad. A majority of the non-elderly, non-disabled households in the voucher program had earnings. And if you include people who had recently worked, as shown by they had earnings in 2009, or they were getting unemployment insurance, which meant they had recently worked and covered employment, you're at 2/3 of the non-elderly, non-disabled households who have labor market attachment, as they say. So it isn't the problem of, and this is, I think, similar to what Jim was saying, there are systems out there that get people to work. And a good chunk of the remaining people are, in fact, enrolled in TANF, where they are subject to a work requirement. The real problem is getting people's earnings up enough so that they have a prospect of not needing housing assistance. And I want to say that the most intriguing thing that we've found in the analysis of the HUD administrative data, from my point of view, is that the length of stay on the voucher program appears to correlate quite directly with housing costs in the community. So that and so people work more the more they stay on housing assistance, but they still can't afford housing without the subsidy help. So to me, that suggests that the real challenge, the nut we have to crack, as Jim said, is how do we really get people's earnings up? And it seems, I don't know the broader work-based literature, but in this discussion that we've been having, the thing that's remarkable to me is the results that the FSS program has shown. And I think Nancy emphasized a bunch of really critical things there in terms of the length of the program, the fact that families that want to concentrate on education or training are allowed to do so, the multifaceted problem solving of the mentoring, and things like that. So I guess my question is more like, okay, so what do we have to do to enable more people in policymaking positions to understand this, to realize it's not a quick fix, that the sort of stick approaches of just make them work are not really going to produce these kinds of results. And so how do we actually make progress and not just spin our wheels in the same discussion that's been going on for decades?
That's your question.
Who wants to address that?
As a policymaker.
Sir.
To me. Well, I think that it goes actually to New York City and the study that you're doing, because we need the evidence, right? We know, they know, HOC, Housing Opportunities, knows that FSS work. Housing authorities across the country know that it works, but we don't necessarily have the evidence that we can present to Congress to say, here it is. Here's a study, there's a control group, here's another group, and the earnings went up. And I think it's once a study like yours gets actually completed and the data's out there, we can push that information.
So I want to just add to that, which is I think the New York study is great. It's adding to the literature. I think we need other studies too, because different places are different. I mean, take Jobs Plus. You did it in 5 or 6 different places. 3 of them fully implemented it, right? We can study it there. If you just do one place, it's not enough. We need to replicate these in multiple places. We need to understand the importance of context, and which is why it's great that the department is going to be studying FSS, hopefully in multiple sites, hopefully established programs rather than new programs, a little bit like their tracking study where they looked at 13 different agencies. But I also think personally that we need to be looking at other models too and contrasting them. Doesn't make a difference if it's 5 years or 3 years or 7 years. Doesn't make a difference if it's a human capital approach or a work-first approach. I would love to see testing models where we make asset building and earnings incentives available to every single family who walks in the door in subsidized housing and actually integrate it into the fabric. Like they're doing this in Portland in some of their developments where every single family gets access to an escrow account. We need to be studying these in a rigorous way and evaluating them, and we don't have the evidence base. I mean, it's great to see a number of studies. I think the New York study is important, the Jobs Plus study is important, the FSS study is important. But if we're serious about this, I think we need to really ramp up the quantity and the number of parallel studies. So we're testing a diversity of approaches in a diversity of different places rigorously with control groups. And in theory, that's what the Moving to Work program ought to do, but it hasn't been designed in a way that would really maximize its value as a research tool. Martina wants to, and then Nancy.
And I guess I'm just coming at it from a completely different angle, because I think we need to start talking about conversations about stop making it so easy to export our jobs, stop making it so easy to import workers, and start talking about investing in education. We were in California trying to get a pilot program to provide education for nurses, for CalWORKs recipients, so that they, could get, paid scholarships if they would go into nursing. At that time, California were importing a record number of nurses from the Philippines. We could not even start that conversation with our policymakers. So I think, at some point we're going to have to back up and start looking at the structural issues that are having an impact on our families.
Well, I was just going to say that to the questioner who was saying that from New York City, that we are raising people's earnings, but it's not enough. That is very, very true. I would say we have 20% of our FSS graduates in super wealthy Montgomery County, Maryland, well-educated Montgomery County, Maryland. 20% are able to buy homes and move out, I would say. It's 18% who are buying homes and another 2% who are able to move out and onto the fair market for rentals. And for a 2-bedroom rental in Montgomery County, Maryland, the average is about $1,400 a month. So a lot of our folks cannot afford that even when they graduate from FSS. And back to the question, Barbara, what can we do? I hope that the powers that be will fund the Workforce Investment Act, the workforce development, so that there is training money out there. I hope that the Pell Grants and other training funds and educational funds will be funded, because people need the education, and that is how they do better.
Okay, Jim, quickly, and then we're going to go to our 2 commenter, and then any final words and wrap up.
Okay. Just on skills, I mean, basically, if you want to raise earnings for those who have an attachment to the labor force, you have to find some way to enhance skills so that they can command a higher wage, and it's a very difficult thing to do. One of the things I've been struck by in some of the work we've done, randomized trials we've done in these post-employment initiatives that have emphasized training. We have some evidence both from the UK and from the US, from randomized trials, that there are ways to increase participation in training, which looks like a positive impact, but it doesn't necessarily translate into better jobs or advancement in the labor force. So I think what that research is encouraging us to do is really think hard about how you approach training. And some of the work that's been coming out on sector-based strategies is quite promising, and HHS and others are making, I think, important investment to test how to build on those approaches. And perhaps a study that we're actually going to be doing in New York City and a few other cities is whether you get much more powerful effects by combining sector-based, sector-focused training with some post-employment support. Together, both may be more powerful than either alone. And one thing that seems not to be productive in general is just simply providing some guidance and case management around advancement. Doesn't seem to be much payoff to that.
Hi, I'm Seema from Baltimore, the University of Baltimore. And maybe inherent in your comments already is an underlying, hopefully, relationship between HUD and the Department of Labor. I'm actually very curious to read your intern study because WIBS and our local housing authorities do seem to be black boxes, and we don't really understand how either of them work or how they work together. And do you see at the federal level, when we think about jobs, obviously the Department of Labor should be pretty good at either understanding how jobs are created, or obviously the WIBs should be involved in trying to come up with new jobs. And then the final one would be the Department of Commerce. So is there the people that are involved in small business development and entrepreneurial opportunities, is there a relationship either at the local level or the federal level where you're opening up the idea, the Department of Education, broadening in the family self-sufficiency what the opportunities and the potential is for finding a job that could lead to a self-sufficient wage?
So on the Department of Labor front, we actually meet with them quarterly, right? So the program people meet. And some of the things we're doing, one, the letter, we're sending it, there was a letter signed by our secretary and the DOL secretary to all of the workforce investment boards, all of the housing authorities when the stimulus money came out. And the letter basically said, we have public housing residents all across the country who need to access some of the jobs being created. They cannot access those jobs unless they go through, many of them, through a training program that you run on Department of Labor side. So can you open up those training programs and our residents can get hired? I won't say that the effect of that letter was zero. I will not say that. But it didn't do a lot, right? So we're still pushing. We have a letter that's going to go to our choice neighborhoods, the workforce investment boards on the choice neighborhood sites. You need to be involved. They've come to us, we've talked around Job Corps, and they say, you know what, in Buffalo, we're under-enrolled. And we said, Buffalo Housing Authority, recruit from the Buffalo Housing Authority. So we're working together there. Where are you under-enrolled? How can we work together? They have returning ex-offender grants, right? We're trying to work with housing authorities where their grants are. So it's a process that we're working with Department of Labor. Department of Commerce, we did some work with them on their BTOP grants or their broadband grants to make sure that public housing was mentioned in there. And so some of that money that went out, it was a lot of money that went out for broadband, some of that would actually go to public housing sites for the broadband piece. And actually in our latest Hope 6 Notice of Funding Availability, you get a point if you're broadband, if you have access and you're wired, et cetera. So we are working some with them.
And one thing I'd add to that is a challenge that's been confronted in New York City, and I'm sure in many other places, is that many of the people living in public housing who need employment assistance aren't going to help the One Stop meet its performance standards. Right. It's a real obstacle that I think should be addressed at the federal level. So that needs to be taken into account.
Yeah, can I get to Eileen? Because we have 4 more minutes and people need to get to lunch.
I just want to acknowledge that there is a problem because our residents do not make it into that labor system because they're 3rd grade reading level as opposed to an 8th grade reading level and it's creamed. That's an issue. Sorry.
Okay, Eileen.
Hi, I'm Eileen Neely. I'm with the Washington, D.C. Housing Authority, and we are a moving to work agency, so I'm gathering lots of ideas, hopefully, to take back to my agency. But I'm really fascinated by the voluntary versus non-voluntary aspect of FSS, and then also the carrot FSS, stick work requirements, and then so I'd love to hear your comments on those in general. But Devin, I have a specific question for you. You looked at the Hope 6 with the work requirements and saw a positive impact. Did you also follow the people who left the Hope 6 because they did not meet the work requirement? And did the housing authorities that you looked at allow them to move back, to transfer back into traditional public housing, or once they're in their Hope 6 and they fail the work requirement, is their safety net gone?
So we did look at everyone who's in Hope 6 over time, whether you used unemployment insurance records, so we were able to track them whether they remained in Hope 6 projects or not. So on average, people did better. We did not break it down by people who remain in the Hope 6 projects and met the requirements and people who left the projects because they did, or the Hope 6 residences because they did not meet the requirements. So that'd be something that'd be interesting for us to look at, but we have not done that.
Anybody have any comments? A whole host of good questions we could spend the next hour talking about, but people are probably hungry. So one or two quick responses, anybody?
Okay. With the Jobs Plus findings, we were often asked, would you have had bigger effects if the program were mandatory? And we can't answer that question. It's possible. But the program reached, the vast majority of people. It engaged them somehow within these housing developments as a saturation model. The thing with work requirements that you need to remember is that they're not free, that you have to construct an enforcement mechanism, and that costs money, and it takes staff time, and so there has to be a payoff for it. I think we don't know the answer. It's an important question and probably does deserve careful study in and of itself. And I think that's probably the most honest answer at this point. We don't really know.
Jim, was it still true that Jobs Plus results were kind of in the upper third of the welfare reform kind of findings or job program findings?
Yes, there's a chart in the report that shows, I think, about 30 different welfare to work or employment programs, all based on randomized trials. And the Jobs Plus effects fell within that top third. That's
so
right.
It is interesting that a voluntary program could achieve results that were in the upper third of all these different programs, right? So that's doesn't say that you couldn't have a better outcome with work requirements, but it does suggest that you could be successful with a voluntary program. So would love to talk some more, but we're all hungry. So let's thank the panel and.